Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Extra Shift. I'm Chris here, as always, with Brendon. How are we going?
Pretty good. Yeah. Welcome to your second podcast of the day. Try and squeeze in a few more or whatever. I did get to watch a little bit of the other thing. If anyone missed it, check back on the feed. It was very interesting, and I think probably some different takes than what we would usually get on certain things.
Yeah, everyone from TL Town, it's just fantastic. It was so much fun. Ian and Felix, it was really good. The podcast for that will go up on the podcast feed later on as well. It's also on YouTube if you want to check it out. So please do. It's a lot of fun.
But I got a little bit of a sleep in.
You got to sleep in.
Hopefully, I'll bring some slightly more rested takes. We'll see. But it's episode 205. Welcome to our playoff preview.
It is our playoff preview. So obviously 205. Now, obviously number 5. There's a lot of number 5s in the history of the league. I mean, look, you could go Bill Barilko. If you want to go down a tragically hip path and talk about that, you could do that. Legend that is Cody Ceci. Obviously, the legend that is Jason Demers, of course, San Jose Sharks legend. I'm always looking for a Sharks legend. Some weird guy called Marcel Dion briefly as well. I don't know. Who do you have as your quintessential 5?
Look, there's a lot of players here that I scroll through and see, like, niche previous Penguins, but like not when they were on the Penguins, like Matt Cullen, Christian Ehrhoff. There's some real, Derek England. There's some real throwbacks for me from that perspective. Players who were probably on there at one point in time 10 years ago or something. But look, it's actually, I don't know if that there's a heap of like this year relevant kind of 5s, like maybe Aaron Ekblad, who's apparently back for the first games of the playoffs, and it's we're still very much in those defenseman numbers.
It's largely, look, I think a lot of people, there are a lot of options obviously for 5. I think depending on eras, Potvin and Lidstrom are probably the 2 that a lot of people go to automatically. But Gila
Penguins legend Chad Ruedel.
Yes, exactly. So you've got, look, there are a lot of 5s. We're not going to run through that. More importantly, what we're here for, everybody, is the trivia. So this is something I've introduced, which is that every episode I give Brendon an NHL stat linked to the number.
I'm dreading these because they're so hard.
They're hard for you. How do you think I feel trying to trace?
Honestly, it's an impressive effort for you to just even find these, find anything that matches these numbers.
Well, wait till you see the long bow that I draw. So 205 is the number I'm looking for an NHL stat. The player that I'm thinking of has played 15,205 playoff minutes, which is the most in NHL history.
Oh, wow. Okay. Is this a so how does this relate to 205?
15,205.
Oh, I see. All right. Yeah. Okay. I missed that. Wow.
So most playoff minutes in NHL history at 15,205.
Okay. That's a lot. That's a lot of minutes.
It really is. It's actually, if you think logically, there's a very easy answer that should pop up immediately if you think logically about it.
Is it an active, like, current player?
Okay, the only clue I'm going to give you is they're not an active or current player, but they are involved in the playoffs.
Oh, boy. So it's probably like an ex player on a playoff team then, in terms of like probably like a front office or something.
Yep, it definitely is.
All right. Is it? Gosh.
There's somebody at home listening to this right now yelling.
I know. It's.
When we say it, you're going to go, of course.
It's going to be immediately obvious, I'm sure. But
it's really obvious. It's painfully obvious.
Oh boy.
So I'm going to make.
Is he going to say Yzerman?
I'm going to make it really easy for you.
Oh no, of course no. He's on the Red Wings. No.
Playoff minutes. goalies.
Oh. Of course, yeah. That's so much easier because I was thinking my mind immediately went to like 15,205. That's a lot of minutes for like I was thinking like defensemen or whatever. Like maybe they're playing like 25 minutes or something. But even that is like a lot of games. No, that makes way more sense if it's a goalie.
That should now be the easiest answer ever.
So if we look through like if I try and go off the top of my head, I think goalie's still involved. Like Jim Rutherford is there.
It's closer to a team than general manager.
Oh, like a coach, I'm guessing.
It's a coach.
All right.
And I bet the reason why you're struggling with this is you forget that he was hired as the coach of this team.
Yeah, this is the thing. That's honestly what's sticking me because I'm trying to remember who the head coach of all of these teams is currently.
If you remember, the big surprise coaching hire this year.
Oh yeah, I mean Patrick Waugh. Yeah. I was honestly like that came to my mind immediately, and then I went, hang on a minute. What team was he on again? And I was trying to fucking remember. I cannot right now remember what team he was on again. Remind me what team he's on.
So he's currently coaching the Islanders.
That's right.
I
was like, I know it was somewhere.
He's coached less games in this league this year than a bunch of teams, a bunch of coaches. He's won less games than a bunch of coaches that didn't make the playoffs this year.
Yeah.
But he's in the playoffs because where the Islanders were when he took over.
That makes sense.
That was fun. I love it.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh boy. In my mind, Patrick Waugh is still like associated with the Avalanche, but I'm like, no, that's not right. Where is he?
Where is he? Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start looking now for 206 because it's really hard. I need a page.
Yeah, this is a
reference page. So
I hope at least that like going through my process is interesting for people because I know that I'm never going to just like immediately nail it.
And the process is fun to watch. So the season is over, as we all know. First of all, congratulations to the Rangers on being the unlucky ones to win the President's Trophy.
You hear people like goad the team that wins the President's Trophy as if it's like an actually legitimate curse.
We've talked about this every year. It's a load of garbage. Like the President's Trophy doesn't make you any less likely to go out or more or less likely to win. The playoffs are the playoffs.
If you look at it statistically, like people talk about it as if like, oh, well, if you win the President's Trophy, you should 100% win the cup every time. That's not really how it works.
Especially when everyone was like 2 points away from each other.
Yeah. I mean, we got 16 teams coming into the playoffs. If you gave everyone an equal probability, it's relatively low. Not that everyone should get an equal probability necessarily, but as like a starting point. And then you look at like President's Cup winning teams or whatever, I would wager that the actual percentage of them winning is higher than like the average. And that's really all that you're asking for in terms of, okay, well, this was a good team in the regular season, but we've seen plenty of good teams in the regular season go out in the first round. That doesn't mean that they're cursed.
When we talk about the matchups for the playoffs, like I put it earlier today when I was talking to the guys from Fairtown, it's very much an all or nothing in some cases. Like there's a couple of really titanic struggles that if like the team gets eliminated, like for example, like when we get to Dallas and Vegas, like they're two heavyweights. Now, if Dallas had won the President's Trophy, which they very well could have, they were only just behind the Rangers. If Dallas wins the President's Trophy and then goes out to Vegas, that's not a curse. That's the fact they're playing the reigning defending Stanley Cup champions who were a very good side. Like that's what happens, guys.
Yeah. There's very few easy matchups. We'll talk about the playoffs a little bit later. But
let's get into it. So
no one phones it in the playoffs.
No. So Kucherov wins the Art Ross on 144 and just a beast of a season. And kudos to the Leafs for helping him out with some of that stat padding at the end.
But I mean, honestly, a huge part of Tampa's success this year. I don't know where they would be if they would realistically even be in the playoff picture without this season.
So a stat that I dragged up this morning, we're talking about shooting percentage. We're talking about the Canucks and their high shooting percentage. Yeah, they're level with Tampa.
Yeah,
they're tied on 12%. That's their shooting percentage.
Although they have regressed like a bit towards the end of the season.
No, that's the end of season stat. 12%.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like earlier in the season, I think it was higher than that.
Oh, no, the Canucks were an absolute bender, but that like you wouldn't think of that necessarily, and you definitely wouldn't think of that if it wasn't for Nikita Kucherov, who literally carried that team to where they got. Right? And again, I think when we're talking MVP, and we talked about the MVP race last podcast, obviously, I'd vote Kucherov. I think he's
I mean, I don't think you need the Galaxy Brandon. I think there's a lot of this narrative about like, oh, this player or whatever, and honestly, sometimes it's just, you look at the player with that, incredible season who dragged a team that maybe, shouldn't be there. I feel like Colorado was a better team without McKinnon than Tampa is currently without Kucherov. And that's kind of it for me, realistically.
Yeah, I think that Kucherov wins it. I think there'll be a lot of McKinnon because, we've talked about this in the last episode. A lot of people will look at McKinnon and go, well, first of all, he's the one that doesn't have one. And secondly, probably should have got the one when Taylor Hall got one.
That's true. One. Yeah, Taylor Hart. Yeah, I'm not too upset, really, honestly. If who wins it out of the two,
I don't think it matters. I don't think it's McDavid. And if they vote McDavid, I think that's easy, personally. And that's not saying he didn't have a good year. He did.
Yeah, for sure.
But
he's kind of slightly a victim of his own standards too. Like when he has like a down year, it's like, oh, only 132 points.
Yeah, and like the over 100 assist thing, where Gretzky, Lemieux, or McDavid, Kucherov, they're the only players to get over that. Like, that's insane.
And McDavid and Kucherov were just this year. Like, prior to this season, it was just Gretzky, Lemieux, and Orr. So both of them joining that elite company this year is pretty impressive.
Austin Matthews gets the Rocket with a very nice 69. I watched that. So I watched that last game where they were trying to get him 70. He had, I think, 12 shots compared to the rest of his team may have had 3. The funny part about that was when it got into the last period, for some reason, other Leafs were shooting. I don't know why. We were all there for the TJ Brody goal, which stopped them getting a power play. That was smart. They're going to the power play. Here we go. This is the Leaf chant. Oh, look, Brody's just roofed one. So why? Give the puck to them and do that. And then they get down to the last minute or so, and then Tavares decides he's going to score one. I'm like, what are you doing? Just sort of keep
plan here. Yeah.
Keep go to him don't worry about it.
I think it's hard, you talk about teams tank but players don't in a way. It's hard, I think, to turn off that competitive instinct for players.
Well, they weren't going to let him get 70.
No.
But here's the other thing. I don't think this is the last time that Matthews has a tilt at this. I think we're going to see this a few times.
Yeah, that's probably true. He's still pretty young. He could do it again. It's really just, I think, a matter of health for him. It's not like he hasn't been on similar insane paces before. It's just, he'll miss 15, 20 games.
Yeah, his last insane scoring season, he didn't play 82 games that year. He missed a chunk of time with the shoulder. It was the wrist injuries, right? And that was the other part. Was when he came back, his shot wasn't exactly where it had been previously, and he was still scoring. So it's absolutely insane.
Yeah, and he played 81 this year, which is literally since his rookie season the highest amount of games that he's played.
Hellebuck and Laurent Brossoit win the Jennings. So look. I think that kind of sums up a little bit about the Jets.
Yeah.
That's what sort of the Jets are weird. There are a couple of teams that fit this category. I don't trust. Yeah, there are teams I don't trust in the playoffs. I know the Jets have been this, but also the Jets have had really bad gluts in the middle there. I don't know. I think if Hellebuck is good, the Jets will go decently. But I think it relies on Hellebuck.
Yeah, and I think there's a few teams that kind of get as far as their defense and their goaltending, let them kind of scrape it out because they're not, any kind of, huge powerhouse of a team that looks like they're going to take over everything.
Yeah. I think so. The MVP race will be interesting. I think the coach of the year will be fascinating because it's going to be basically whoever's goaltender did the best job for them. I'm kind of torn on coach of the year, actually. I feel like Rick Tockett's going to come close.
Yeah.
Vancouver suddenly remembering that Thatcher Demko can save pucks.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've said it before. The coach, tends to go to the team that has, a goalie either play out of their mind or the team overperforms their expectations. Usually both at the same time. As we previously seen with like Columbus and so forth. Usually you find some team on a PDO bender that that their goaltender played out of their mind, and that's who you point to and go, oh, that's coach of the year. It's unfortunately that simple sometimes.
The other one that always doesn't matter, but is always interesting to me is GM of the year. It doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But did you see that Wyshynski pushed at one point to say that Mike Greer should be general manager of the year? Because his argument was he's done exactly what that team needs him to do. He's put them in a position to do that. He's gone out and got good young signings. He's doing all this stuff. GM of the year, Mike Greer. I'm like, even I can't make that stretch, and I would love to. But
it's interesting though, because I think that there's an interesting nugget of an argument there in that not everyone's job is the same as GM, as a GM of one team's GM role, depending on the position of their team, is very different than another. It tends to go to a team who like a GM who sets up their team to have actual playoff success and all that kind of stuff that year. But that's not the position that a lot of teams are in. I would be interested to see some GM win it who just tore down their team in a really impressive way or something, because that's kind of also their role. But teams tend to get judged on their eventual kind of outcome of what happens after that, because the point in tearing it down is that in 5 years' time you're going to be good, but GM of the year is awarded based on just 1 year of stuff, so you're never going to win it based on a long-term thing. It's always going to be a handful of short-term moves, which isn't really what GMs are all about.
I kind of wonder if we're going to get a Barry Trotz as well, because of Nashville making the playoffs. And again, that was one when we did the predictions at the start. And when we get closer to the end, we'll go through all of our season predictions. But if you remember, I tipped Nashville to make the playoffs, largely off the back of I thought their goaltending would get them over the line. That's what I thought would happen. And that's largely they've given up almost nothing. They've got a lot of assets back. They've made a playoffs in a year where they probably weren't in the hunt normally to make the playoffs. That probably feels like the sweet spot for me in terms of if you're looking for that sweet spot of a general manager, and also people just like Barry Trotz. So
there's an element of that. I think actually it was a Jeff Marek suggestion many years ago on Marek versus Wyshynski that the GM of the year should be based on what someone did 3 years ago. It should realistically be now we're awarding the 2021 GM of the year because we can see how their moves panned out.
Yeah, Toronto wins the Stanley Cup, so Kyle Dubas wins general manager of the year because of all the work.
Because he did all the work that got them there.
He didn't sign Ryan Reeves.
Oh, of course, that's the move of the year.
And we had, I don't know if you heard this morning, but we did have a bit of a lovely chat about it.
I did hear about the Ryan Reeves.
Your Reeves trauma.
Yes.
In fact, we have shared Reeves trauma. So let's get into probably the big bit of news. Not probably, definitely the big bit of news.
Yeah, for sure.
Since we last spoke, a franchise has been made dormant and a new franchise has sprung up in their stead. That gives you an eye, and that's 2 weeks, by the way.
Yeah, it really kind of came out of nowhere, not in terms of speculation. Obviously, people have been speculating about the Codys for years, but in terms of the messaging, it was very much everything's fine. We've got a new arena. Everything's going to be good. We're going to have we've got this plan. Don't worry about it anytime soon. Even Coyotes were just tweeting through it in terms of like, we're going to have an announcement soon. We're going to have.
I feel bad for the social media manager.
Oh yeah. Big news coming soon.
But also, like what was really, we didn't go into it in huge detail on the previous chat, so because I wanted to save it all for this one. But this is something I've been really following very closely. I wrote an article about it, which is on the Facebook page and on Twitter, if you want to have a look at that. And been talking a lot to, especially all the crew over at PHNX. As I said, we were going to have Leah on post-trade deadline because it was a nice quiet time of year and it'd be really easy to talk to them. We were still hoping to get them on, but who knows at this point in time, because as you can understand, their world has exploded.
Obviously it affects a lot of people's jobs.
I do recommend go over and check out the PHNX coverage of all of this. They have been absolutely unreal during the entirety of the process. But the couple of days before this broke, Houston's potential owners gave a statement where they basically said we're definitely serious. We're ready for about 4 years' time. We're not ready now. We're ready for the future. But that seemed to come out of absolutely nowhere. Then there was a tweet talking about the land auction that's coming up next month, and the one that Alex Murillo was going to bid on, and that was the whole, we're bidding on this land, this is the land, we're bidding on this land, this is what we're doing. Then the next day you get, it comes out through tweets from The Athletic that Utah's buying the franchise.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't know about you, but I kind of almost just didn't believe this at first. It felt like it came so out of left field that it was just like, all right, this is some scam. This is some like joke thing about that someone who's been for years being like, oh, the Coyotes are going to get moved. They're going to go to Quebec or whatever, and and then like Utah, like it just kind of it seemed so completely out of nowhere.
Yeah, it was so random and so fast. Like it was rapid. The morning of, it was, oh, this is a potential thing. To suddenly by that afternoon, Friedman and co were all going, this is done.
Yeah, this has already happened.
Already happened. So the part of this is they've been desperate to get that Smith group into the NHL for years. They've been desperate to get that ownership group into the league. Morello obviously failed with the Tempe bid at the time, and I wrote about this the other day. Marty Walsh, the head of the NHLPA, came out at the time they lost the Tempe vote and didn't just say they needed to possibly move. He named Utah. He named it. He went, Utah is there. We can move this team to Utah. And I wonder if there were already talks going on behind the scenes, and maybe the NHL tapped Marty Smith on the shoulder and went, oi, shut up. He didn't say anything else after that. And I wonder if there wasn't a case of, look, if you want your members to possibly have more revenues, more this, shut up. Because we're moving the team, but if you keep talking about it, we're not going to be able to move this damn team. So, because he mentioned Utah specifically and then never said another word. It was really weird. So, because I went back and looked at it, because I was looking for what was the NHLPA's response, and the only reference to Utah came when they spoke to them. So they announced that basically the team is being sold, but the team was being sold not directly to Utah. So Morello sold the team back to the league for $1 billion.
Yeah.
Then the team was sold.
I think he paid $400 million
for it.
Yeah.
Then the team was sold back from the league to Salt Lake for $200 million, for $1.2 billion.
1.2, yeah.
The league made $200 million off this sale. Morello, because he had them over a barrel, was able to negotiate a clause in there, and they talked about it this morning at what was a press conference, that basically in the next 5 years, if Alex Morello builds a NHL caliber arena in Arizona, he is pre-approved to get an expansion Arizona franchise returned, which would reactivate the Coyotes.
Yeah, I'm very curious about this one because, like, from the NHL's perspective, I think it really, on the surface, says obviously, we're still committed to Arizona. We still want this team to be here, but we know that it's just, realistically, just not working right now. So, I think that they do foresee this as eventually working out. But I think that they've also set themselves up in honestly kind of a really no-lose way for the NHL, because if they don't manage to get this worked out, like if in 5 years' time, or in realistically, 3.5, they need to have an arena built. If they don't actually have everything ready to go, the NHL's already made their money back on this. They don't actually really lose anything. They just keep this dormant franchise, and then they just kind of go later on, like down the line, like, oh, maybe if it all works out or whatever, we've still got this option, but we're not actually kind of losing anything. I think that they've kind of covered themselves pretty well in terms of the gamble here, because I think that there's a very legitimate chance that within a few years' time, Murillo isn't any closer to actually having the team back in Arizona. Like that seems like a very likely possible outcome.
So my whole thing with this was, I believed all the way through that Murillo's plan was win the land auction, build an entertainment complex, possibly with a rink in it, and then flip it. And flip the rights and flip the rink and flip it all to someone else and make more money out of it. Use the $1 billion that he got from the NHL to buy and build, and then flip the team to someone else and make his money back. And then he owns an entertainment complex, which he got paid for.
Yeah. Which I think ultimately has always been his plan, has been owning the area around the arena. And
that's been the problem with, I listed it in the article I wrote. There's a consistent lack or problem in that every owner that has bought the Coyotes since the league owned it has bought the Coyotes to own other land in Arizona. The reason they moved to Glendale. Well, the whole move to Glendale.
That's NHL teams in general. Like, it's been the reality in a while that, development of an arena is so much more around the district that surrounds the arena.
The difference has been with the way that the Coyotes have had it at work is that they've been moved out of profitable areas to backwaters.
Yeah.
Like Glendale was 90 minutes each way round trip from Phoenix, with no public transport links and a ring road that made it really inaccessible. So you're not getting fans to travel for 3 hours overall on a weeknight to go and watch the Coyotes play. That's just not a thing that was going to happen. So attendances start dropping. And they're like, well, why aren't people going to watch them in Glendale? Hockey doesn't work in the desert. No, it does if you put it near people. Yeah. They go to Mullet. And obviously they're doing well at Mullet, but that's a tiny arena and you can't keep playing in Mullet.
Yeah.
It's just been one of those situations where the league, I think that the league, there's a sort of, the deal was originally that I thought Murillo was going to flip it, but apparently, according to the contract, Alex Murillo cannot flip the team.
I mean, that's good, I think.
He is required, if he activates the franchise, he is required to then maintain ownership for at least 5 years after the franchise is restarted.
Mm-hmm.
And he can only bring in other investors for up to 20%. So they've even limited the investment.
I think that's probably for the best in terms of like...
It's for the best, but my problem...
For the NHL's perspective, I can understand why they wouldn't want to, especially having no say over who the franchise goes to.
I agree to a point with what they've done, but the problem for me is that they've pre-approved Murillo to just get his team back. Now, I understand probably legalese to get the franchise off him in the first place.
I wonder if that was just a necessity in order to get him to sign off on this plan.
Yeah, I think they needed to do that. But the problem with that is that he's pre-approved as a league owner, even though we know that there's been issues around payment of bills.
Yeah.
We know that they were talking like I'll get into the press conference in a minute because that deserves its own conversation. But as Craig Morgan reported on PHNX this morning, talking about the press conference, when Gary Bettman said at the end of the press conference, he's been leaking money on this franchise, I believe Craig Morgan's statement was it's to the tune of $60 million is what they've been leaking playing in Mullet. So That's I don't care how much money you've got. Leaking $60 million because you're playing in a college level arena. That's not good.
And that's with packing out that arena.
That's with packing that arena out.
Yeah,
so
obviously that's not a very tenable situation.
Now the press conference, we'll talk about the press conference before we talk about the actual problem with this that I have, which is largely the way that the Coyotes fans have been treated. The press conference this morning, if you have not watched Alex Morello and Gary Bettman at the press conference, go and find it. Go and watch it. Pause this. Go and watch that first and then come back. Because I put it this morning when I was talking to Ian and Felix that it was like watching a puppeteer working the puppet sitting next to it at the counter. Alex Morello gave an introductory press conference when he got there and hasn't spoken to the press since.
Mm-hmm.
And Craig Morgan's talked about it a lot, that they've tried and they can't get him. And today, when Alex Morello spoke, we all understood why Alex Morello doesn't speak to the cameras. It was an absolute slow-moving train wreck of a press conference. He insisted things like they spent $7 million to try to win the Tempe vote. The statistics from which they had to publicly talk about because it was a public campaign show they spent $1.1 million on that. He claimed that he and his family personally door-knocked over 1,000 houses and they were all desperate out there to go and get the vote. All things that can be proven as not accurate. He claimed again that hockey works here, and if you've just got the arena, hockey works here. And everything he said seemed to reinforce the fact that his ownership was shit. But what got really interesting is there were a couple of bits and pieces. At one point, he said, "I don't like the media. I don't like the press."
Yeah.
And then
you saw Gary go.
And you saw Gary. He's doing this with his hands, trying to get in there. And he finishes, and Gary goes, "What he meant to say was he doesn't like doing media."
I esteem colleague here meant to say
spotlight, and he's like, "Yeah, that's what I meant." And then he got to the end, and I think it was Craig Morgan again who asked three questions of Morello, and Gary literally just went through the middle of it and went, "I'll take this." By the end of it, you could see Gary didn't want to let Alex Morello speak anymore. He just kept taking over because you just got this feeling that every time Alex Morello opened his mouth, he said another dumb thing. And Gary Bettman was just sitting there with this look on. As he talked, you could visibly see Gary start to hate him. Like you could see Gary Bettman looking at this man going, "You're an idiot. You are an absolute moron." And that's when he did things like stressed that he's lost a lot of money on this venture and stressed a bunch of he just started stressing that basically Morello screwed up a lot. But it's an all-timer. In terms of a press conference, it's an all-timer. As I said in the thing I wrote yesterday, I kind of feel like, and I don't know how you do it, but in British football, in the Premier League and in the Championship and all those sorts of leagues, because they had so many dodgy owners come in, they introduced what they called the fit and proper persons test, where you had to demonstrate that you had, not only did you have the capital, but you had liquid capital that you could spend to maintain the adequate running of an organization. Right? And you needed to demonstrate that you had access to these funds, you can use these funds, that these funds aren't and again, I know that to some extent you go, yeah, Morello's got land and blah, blah, blah. A large problem with this is they're not paying bills.
Yeah.
And
we've heard about this, in the last year or two with the Coyotes that they, anytime that trying to stiff out contracts and pay, a less amount to settle out a bill and all this kind of stuff. They've, it's not like this is a new thing. This is something that they've been doing for years and that's essentially what got them really kind of run out of their previous arena.
And I think if you bring in a fit and proper person test, I don't know if Morello passes it, to be honest. I really
I think I think it's a great idea in terms of them going forward. I feel like they probably realize this, and it's probably too late in terms of Morello already kind of being in the fold.
I mean,
And that's probably why they had to settle for this plan where they're like, oh, well, you look, worst case scenario, there's a good chance that he can't make this happen. And in 5 years' time, we're free. I'm curious what happens after. Like, let's say that 5 years passes and he's not ready to reinstate the thing. Does he then, like, basically, I think that the code is technically, I'll like owned by the NHL again at that point in time.
So what they'll do is
sell it to someone else. I feel like that's probably the best outcome.
Yeah. So what they'll do is they'll spark another expansion round. Now, what's really interesting about the expansion rounds, and we had a bit of a chat about this on the pod this morning, but also like I've been talking about this in the last couple of days. If Arizona comes back, you get a situation on your hands where you're starting to get to the point now where you need to do realignment. Because you've added now Utah's going to be in the Western Conference. So you've added another team. You bring Arizona back, you've added another Western team. The next expansion is also likely to be the next expansion that's coming up as well is then likely to be either Houston or Atlanta. Now, I'm leaning more towards it being Houston just because I think that that's where they want to be.
Yeah.
But as Ian mentioned this morning in the point, he raised a really good point as well, which is that Atlanta balances up
the conferences. Yeah.
Now, the other part of that was, as we said, well, if you bring in Houston, then surely at that point you go back to Quebec and go, okay, because you've got to balance the conferences up in some way, shape, or form. My argument against Atlanta is I don't know if you're going to see a situation where the NHL is going to take franchises out of Winnipeg, out of Arizona, and out of Atlanta, and then immediately expand into Winnipeg, Arizona, and Atlanta. I don't know if they're going to just do that. I don't see it personally. I think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of factors in terms of arenas and groups and.
I think they want to be in Houston. I definitely think they want to be in Houston. And again, that's all linked to the that's all linked to the NBA as well, and getting that new arena there. Now, speaking of arenas. The Delta Center, which is the new home of the Utah Blanks, more than likely going to be the Utah Hockey Club because apparently they don't need to have branding for the first 12 months.
It's interesting. I wonder how long they've known that this was a likely possibility, how long they've been able to necessarily plan for this. You would think that if you were for years wanting to have a team, you would trying to be like securing some kind of rights to a name. We saw a tweet from Wyshynski talking about the names that were filed with the US Patent and Trademark Office, which were, Utah HC, Utah Hockey Club, but also Blizzard, Venom, and Fury, which all sound like lacrosse teams or street hockey teams to me. I think Blizzard is probably the most like ice hockey of those things, but I wonder how much, it's too close to like Avalanche in terms of like having similar kind of snow-based weather concept as a name.
I mean, you've had the stock standard suggestions of the Utah Sister Wives and the Utah Golden Tablets and all sorts of bits and pieces there, and that's going to come out of there as well. I mean, look, it fits Utah just as well as the Jazz, which, as we know,
well known for Jazz in
New Orleans. Well, again, we've there's been a lot of articles about this in the past, but for people who aren't aware, the Jazz they kept it when they moved from New Orleans, which makes a lot more sense to think about it. And the Lakers. You find me a lake in Los Angeles. Go on, do it.
I mean, I think that's the same thing I said for the Golden Knights is that eventually after a year or two, you kind of just forget about it and it becomes the name and you don't, there's a lot of shit names, honestly, already in the NHL. The Blues suck. There's a heap of names which are already bad. I kind of wish, honestly, that the Jazz were the hockey team, though, and you could have the Blues versus the Jazz. But
that could be so much more fun.
For the most part, there's a lot of bad team names already in the NHL. I'm not expecting, a real banger to come out of Utah, but look, maybe it's for the best. If those are their best options, maybe it's the best that they think about it for a while.
What I found really interesting about they've bought all the contracts. They haven't bought the name and the franchise, but they've bought all of the contracts and just taken them all over there.
Yeah.
So the Delta Center, first of all, It's got 12,000 seats that are hockey, except for hockey, and 4,000 obstructed view seats. It is also only younger than Madison Square Garden and the Saddle Dome. Now they're talking apparently about they're getting an expansion done. They reckon in the next couple of years, and they'll get it up to 17,000 seats. But it's not a new arena; it's very much an older arena. There was a lot of talk about because Salt Lake City's bidding for the Winter Olympics again, but apparently that's not part of this. They're not moving to that arena. The plan is to expand the Delta Center into a bigger arena. That's what they're looking at. And Gary Bettman this morning seemed to think that would take maybe 2 years, and then they would be able to expand it out to like 17,000, 18,000 seats. I'm interested as well because it was a point that was raised. They've bought the contracts. What if players in the league going to be allowed to revisit their no moves and no trades?
Yeah, so I heard you mention that on this little solo podcast you did around the Arizona situation as it was kind of unfolding. I know that for sure there are some. At least some, I don't know if this is the case for all no move clauses, but I know at least for many of them, the player is allowed to resubmit a list every year coming into the season. I know that because this came up with that whole situation around the Vegas situation with, like someone should have been on a no move clause and it wasn't transferred, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, but it came up that every off season basically they're allowed to modify that list. I think if they don't, then it just stays with the same list. But that may not be the case with every no move clause. The verbiage may be different with some versus others. But I would be surprised if for like players who have like a no move clause that spans like 5 or 6 seasons, you wouldn't have just the one thing that you could, because teams are going to be very different in 6 years' time than when you originally signed that. Generally, I think that you have the option to resubmit it if for some reason you just want to go to Utah.
I would hope they're given the chance to do that like around the draft, because they might make them wait until like the new league year starts before they can redo that. I would like to think that the league is going to basically say to players, you can redo that before the draft.
Yeah, I'd have to look into exactly how that what that is. It's probably different contract per contract.
Now, the two other parts that I think we need to stress here is, first of all, from an Arizona standpoint, my big point with all my articles and the stuff I've talked about is that this is not hockey doesn't work in the desert. This has nothing to do with a fan base not supporting a team. This has nothing to do with hockey not surviving in Arizona. This is really bad ownership, and the NHL sort of letting bad ownership make far too many bad decisions without really putting checks on them.
I do feel really bad for the players, because it does sound like they really weren't told much at all about.
No, they were given. So the players were only spoken to when the head coach went back to management and said to Bill Armstrong, because Armstrong was at the fight for the Frozen Four, and basically got on the phone with him and said, you need to fly in, because they were playing in Edmonton, and basically said, you need to fly in and talk to these people, because you've told nobody anything. The players are only seeing media reports. No one is speaking to them. We need to fix this. So he got on the plane, flew into Edmonton to tell them basically, yeah, look, this is all happening, and then flew out.
Yeah. Because, they're very much like, we talk about, players being traded and stuff, and the kind of courtesy of the reality of being an NHL player that's traded is you, for the most part, really have to move your whole family to a new location. You've probably got a house that you bought in this old location that you were working. It's a volatile job in terms of that actual living situation, because maybe you've got to sell your house and now buy a house in Utah, and you're there for the next 5 years, all this kind of stuff. Looking at the cap friendly for the Coyotes, there is only honestly a couple of players in Schmaltz and Kerfoot who have like a modified no trade list, which is like a 10-team no trade list. Obviously, they don't realistically have an option. I wonder how many of those players are upset or happy about moving from Arizona to Utah, all of that kind of thing. Like, realistically, it's like the entire team got traded, and that's I don't know that necessarily they've had the time yet to really kind of actually plan out like what their life is going to be like, moving to Utah.
The whole thing's weird too, because like, again, like one of the big sticking points with Winnipeg, for example, was when Winnipeg moved to Arizona. That whole sticking point was, well, does the Jets' history go to Arizona or does it stay in Winnipeg? And when the new franchise came along, do the Jets get that history? Does Arizona have it? They've made it quite plain that Utah doesn't take the Coyotes' history with them. It stays. That was also writ large when, for example, they found that Shane Doan's jersey banner was still at Gila River Arena.
Yeah.
And it had never been moved, and it had been taken down from the rafters, and at one point was just sort of sitting in a box out the back, and no one had bothered. Apparently, the team had been asked several times to come and get Shane Doan's banner and hadn't. And so some guy went and got it and then gave it to Shane Doan at the last game that happened at Mullet. But literally, Shane Doan's banner was left at the Gila River Arena and didn't make the move to Mullet, and no one from the Coyotes bothered to go and get the damn thing. So someone took it upon themselves to go and get it for Shane Doan. The other interesting part is that Shane Doan and Josh Doan now have a very unusual set of firsts.
Yeah.
Because Shane Doan drafted and then immediately played one season in Winnipeg and then moved to Arizona. His son plays his first season in Arizona and the team is relocated. So look out for Shane Doan's grandson. Because if he signs for your team, they're in trouble. They're in big trouble if that happens because your whole franchise is going. Look, the other thing to note about this is that Utah's going to be successful.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, if you look at that cap friendly for Arizona, there's a lot of contracts off the books. There's a lot of cap to play with.
It's not a bad team in terms of the actual
development team. That's
nice product and assets and stuff.
Well, the hard part for the fans is the fans had to go through crap after crap after crap after crap, and they finally got the rebuild working the way they want it to, and they've got a lot of very good young players all starting to click into gear at once, and then they move and they go. The other thing is that Salt Lake City has said they will be aggressive. Sorry, Utah, because they're going to be Utah, not Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
They've said they're going to be very aggressive in free agency. They're not sitting around. I raised this morning in the earlier podcast, Steven Stamkos is the top free agent. I wonder if you throw all the money there. I wonder if you go, let's bring Stamkos in. There's a couple of good options there, but I think Stamkos is probably the one you can get. If you look at the free agents that are all popping up, it's a decent free agency class. And remember, this is also the cap going up year. So we've got the cap going up a bit. We've got some good free agents sitting out waiting for someone to come and get them. And look, we know for a fact, for example, that you're not going to get Stamkos is not going back to Tampa. There's no way they can afford him. But you've got Stamkos, you've got Sam Reinhart's around. Jake Gensel's around.
It could be a really interesting off season in terms of this team kind of setting a standard of like look, we want to be competitive to begin with. We're ready to we've got a bunch of assets because they've got a shitload of picks because the Coyotes have been collecting up these picks for the last few years. They've got 3 second round, 3 third round picks this year. They've got 4 second round picks next year. It's there's a lot of assets there for them to make some trades, put into this team and make it into something that is kind of interesting from the beginning. I think maybe in a lot of ways, this is probably a big improvement for the players that came out of that situation. They may be actually stepping into a much more beneficial environment for them to win.
And, the only thing that I'm now terrified of course, as a Sharks fan is we're all waiting for Uncle Gary and Uncle Bill to pull the ping pong ball out to say that Utah has the first overall pick with their first draft. Waiting for it because, of course, they're going to do that. And, I don't believe that the draft lottery is rigged ever. However, if Utah get first overall, you better believe I'll be shouting that from the rooftops. By the way, I will, at this point in time, the plan is that I will be live streaming the draft lottery because there's going to be nothing more fun for everybody in this group and everyone that I know than watching a Sharks fan go through that torment. Again, my favorite philosophy that I've heard from a bunch of Sharks fans was they want the Penguins to win the lottery.
Well, I don't think we can. I don't think you can move
if
down.
The Penguins win the lottery, the highest you can jump is 4th.
Yeah.
So that's why they're like, if all the cards stay the same, but the Penguins get the first pick, the Penguins get 4th and the Sharks get 1st. And what that means is then the Penguins need to make a decision because that pick is supposed to be coming to us.
Yeah.
So the Penguins will either pick 4th and give us next year's 1st, or let us pick 4th. Now, they'll pick 4th. There's no question about that.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's a lot of Sharks fans going, look, if the Sharks aren't going to win the lottery, we only want one team to move. It's the Penguins.
Yeah.
If the Penguins win the lottery, the Sharks win the lottery.
Yeah.
And that's all we're here for. So any scenario that means that we're getting 1st overall, especially in a year where it's very unusual, but there's a player who's going 1st overall who wants to go to the Bay Area and would like to play for the Sharks.
Yeah, it would be a really nice story.
Like I said, Brady, he wants to play for us. Let him play for us.
Please.
Which means he's going to go and play in Utah. Anyway, let's get into the playoffs, shall we? Because it's playoff season, folks. It is playoff season. Now, we got a bunch of weird end-of-season games. The West seemed like nobody wanted to – nobody was quite sure if they wanted to come in the wild card or if
it almost honestly really seemed like Vegas was intentionally trying to –
They both tried. The Kings tried at one point. Vegas tried at one. Vegas lost, which it didn't make any sense to me because Vegas knew that if they fell into the wild card, they'd play Dallas.
Yeah.
And if they didn't, they'd play Edmonton. I would have thought that if I'm Vegas, I'd rather play Edmonton than Dallas. I think Dallas is a hard.
I probably would too, I think, realistically.
Yeah. I think the Kings, on the other hand, and I talked about this this morning as well, but I've said this all the way along. I think Vegas and the Kings are the two teams that play Edmonton the worst in terms of matchup for Edmonton. I think LA and the Kings both – LA and the Kings, LA and Vegas both play Edmonton in a way that I don't think Edmonton likes. And, I think Edmonton are the favourites, obviously, to beat LA. But I'm not convinced. And I know that every year I do this with Edmonton, but every year they prove me right. And I don't think it would be a massive upset if LA wins because we've seen the way they've played them 2 series in a row. They know the formula. They know the philosophy. They nearly carried it out to perfection the first time. They didn't quite get it right last year. But if they know the formula and they can get it right, I think LA are the team that could knock Edmonton out the first round.
Yeah, I think that stylistically, there's definitely some teams that give them a hard time that really kind of are good at shutting down, McDavid and Draisaitl's ability to score, which is just a huge, really one component of Edmonton winning any series. I think, I think that's a potential outcome. Let's maybe, do you want to go one series at a time and talk about our predictions?
Yeah, let's go through each series. Now, we'll start in the East because we didn't talk about the play-in in the East. Because the play.
So that was interesting. I think within, I kind of hoped that it would go down to the last day, specifically because the Penguins were playing on that last day, and they could,
you were hopeful.
If the things had fallen right, they could have squeezed in. But as I said, I think in the last episode, I didn't think that was very likely to happen because they were coming from a long way back. Honestly, like a month before this, the Penguins were way out of the picture, 8 points out of the picture. It just didn't seem like it was going to happen. But they managed to squeak their way back into a wildcard spot for the first time in months. But realistically, they had to rely on the Capitals and the Islanders and the Red Wings losing a handful of games, and it could have fallen that way. But it came down to those teams in those last few games playing teams that didn't really care, and winning those games, which made it impossible for the Penguins to make it. The Penguins would have had to win. I think the last 4 or 5 games in a row to squeeze in because they ended up 3 points short, but they did have the tiebreaker. They lost 2 out of those last 6 or 7 games, and that was enough that they couldn't, quite squeak in. Which is, I wasn't expecting them to get in. I wasn't expecting them to go far if they did. So I'm not super upset about it. But at the same time, it is hilarious to me that the Islanders and the Capitals both made it in, because it was just a fucking clown show of teams that are probably going to be first round exits making it in.
Oh, I think it's absolutely ridiculous in terms of the way that all ended. It's just I don't see them making a big impression. So
well, let's talk about those teams then. Let's talk about the Metro. So we've ended up with the New York Rangers versus the Washington Capitals. The Capitals making it in with like a negative 30 goal differential or something like that. Kind of limping into the playoffs in the last. Do you? I mean, look, I can't imagine that you have the Capitals winning this series. Do you have the Capitals winning any games in this series?
When I can put you back on the screen, because I just moved it around for a minute. I've got the Capitals winning 1.
I do as well. So I have New York in 5. I just cannot fathom a world, like as much as I don't believe in the Rangers as much as they're the President's Trophy winners and all that kind of stuff. As much as I don't believe that they're a juggernaut of a team, I just cannot fathom the Capitals beating them.
I think I've got the Rangers in 5. I think from memory, we'll bring up the end of it. We'll bring up the what we've got for our brackets. But yeah. I think I got the Rangers in 5. I don't have any sweeps. I think the Rangers are.
I don't either. Yeah, I think that realistically, like, there's probably going to be a sweep just completely out of nowhere. But the Capitals, I think, that are everything that's wrong with the Penguins in terms of being this ancient, slow, geriatric team, but worse. But they somehow managed to get an incredible streak of goaltending out of their backup, and managed to squeeze in a handful of basically games that they didn't deserve to win to make it into the playoffs.
And Ovechkin remembered how to score, which helped.
Oh, of course. I mean, which was always going to happen, realistically. Like, he was never going to completely fall off the map like he did at the start of the year. I'm glad, honestly, that he's still kind of in the running to get that that Gretzky record. He's made it, trickier, obviously, having that slow start. But when he ended up with something like 31 goals or something.
Yeah, but I think, look, for me, I think the Rangers have harder tests coming up in the next round. My big thing, and you know this because I rode this train last year, is
34.
Panarin had a much better year this year.
I know, 31. Yeah.
My question mark remains: does Artemi Panarin turn up in the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, that's been your kind of, criticism of Panarin in the past, and at least, this year he's been scoring like you've been wanting him to.
Regular season, he's been great, but I want to see it in the playoffs now. I think if you're paying him that and you're treating him like that, and Rangers fans were like, he won't get a nomination, but he should be in the running for the Hart, and great, prove it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think we've both got them going through to the next round, so we'll probably talk about that once they play like a real team.
I'm gonna leave that up for a second just for people to admire my hand. So somebody in the group pointed out that I had used the wrong Vancouver Canucks. If you're listening to this, you won't see it. In the Australian NHL fans page, I'd used the wrong Vancouver Canucks logo, so I made my own one,
which is exactly the same as the previous one, but it doesn't.
And to be honest, I think that works a lot better for Vancouver, so I'd keep that personally.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Islanders, though. The Islanders are. This one I got really close to saying this could be a sweep as well. I think that the Hurricanes will stomp all over the Islanders.
I agree. Yeah, look, I also have the Hurricanes in 5. I think the Islanders are more of a chance to actually kind of be close in some games just because of the style of hockey that they play. But at the same time, I don't think that they're a strong team, and I don't think that they would have made the playoffs this year in a Metro that was actually respectable.
No, I think that the Metro was another one that we'll talk about it when we get to the Pacific, but the Metro was a division that nobody seemed to really want to grab.
Yeah.
At the end, like, it was weird because you had teams that were just like, yeah, this is ours, and then a bunch of teams, and it wasn't like they were scrapping by being better than each other. It was a race to the bottom.
It was basically the Rangers and Carolina being the only 2 decent teams in the division, and everyone else just falling over each other to be mediocre.
Everyone else was absolute trash. So,
yeah. And the Islanders basically just ended up being like the most consistently average of the remaining teams. That's basically what got them in the third spot in the Metro, which was up for grabs until those last 2 or 3 games.
And again, I think that Carolina won't have too many issues here. Ian this morning raised the question mark around their goaltending, which, as we all said, is made of glass.
I mean, it's obviously been back and forward between a handful of options this year. I think that's the big question mark for them in terms of is Anderson their starter? Is Kochetkov their starter? Is does it matter? I think that they require someone to get hot and go for a little run. And
I think it's Freddie Anderson, but it's Freddie Anderson depending on if he's healthy. That's the thing. All right, let's get to it. Toronto versus Boston. Now, my point this morning, and I've made this point a few times, is I actually think that Toronto sort of crapping the bed the way they did was good because I think this is a better matchup than Florida would have been by a mile.
I do think that Florida is legitimately a way better team than Boston is, for sure. But obviously there's a lot of baggage in this series.
Well, there's a lot of baggage, but my point that I made this morning is, I want to see what your view was on it. I think that the Panthers play Bruins playoff hockey more than the Bruins do now.
Yeah, I don't know that the Bruins are necessarily the rock'em sock'em team that they once were in terms of that, and especially with some of the players that they've lost and the quality of product that they've lost on the ice. I think that the Bruins are not the Bruins that they once were in many ways. But at the same time, there's just this mental block for me at this point in time in terms of picking Toronto over the Bruins, and that's a very different thing. I think coming into this year, I had to look back at my predictions, and I'll talk about them a little bit as we kind of go through. But I was much higher on Toronto at the start of the season than I am now, and I really just don't think that they improved themselves in a really significant way this year. And I picked them to overcome this problem in the past, to win and get through the Bruins and all that kind of stuff last year. And I don't know that they're better set up to do it now than they were in the past when I picked them to do that, and then they failed at it.
I've got them winning this one, but I don't have them going any further. And again, I don't think it's because of anything that they've done in terms of as a general manager, for example.
Yeah.
We've talked about this openly. I've talked about this a lot. I hate the build of the back end of the Maple Leafs. I really think it's poor. And again, talking before, and I think Ian raised a very good point, which was the trick with Ryan Reeves is you ignore Ryan Reeves and don't play into what Ryan Reeves wants you to do. And if any team's going to look at Ryan Reeves and go, what?
Yeah. If he's a factor in the series, you fucked up real bad.
Yeah. And this is the thing, because my point is there's a difference between big body hockey in the playoffs and punching people in the face.
Yeah.
And I think too many people in Toronto have gone from this idea of pure skill to big body hockey means punching people in the face, and have skipped the whole step, which is you play heavy, you don't play to beat people up. And I think that's where I think Toronto's depth is bad, is that I don't think they play heavy. I think they've signed people expecting them to punch people in the face. And I don't know. I also think that Mitch Marner is very much under some pressure here. And it sounds weird to say Mitch Marner, but he's the movable one. And if it doesn't work, it's him.
Yeah, for sure. Like, how many games do you have this going to? Because I have 7 games, and I have Boston coming out of this series, but it's a coin flip for me. I really feel like there's 2 teams.
I actually have Toronto in 6.
Okay.
But my reason for Toronto in 6 is that I think that Matthews will have a good start.
Yeah.
And I think that as we talked about other teams, and this team will go as far as Auston Matthews decides they're going.
I could very much see the Maple Leafs winning the first couple of games of this series. I think it's after that becomes the thing. I think that once Boston starts winning, I really think it's mental. I just think it's whether or not they can get over that hump and close it out, or whether they choke it away. That's really kind of what it comes down to for me. It very much could go either way.
For me, the question in this series is: does Matthews solve Swayman and Allmark? And if Matthews solves them, I think that the scoring talent that they've got at that top end is enough.
Yeah, I mean that's very much what Boston has going for them is that goaltending. If the Maple Leafs can break it open, absolutely, they win the series easily.
And that's my argument.
If they get into that slog, I feel like the Bruins can drag.
Once it becomes a grind, it's over.
Yeah,
like once it becomes a grind, then it's done. The other one is the Battle of Florida, and I think this is the most underappreciated series. I think this is going to be an absolute barn burner, and I think
this is the one that I'm looking forward to in the East for sure. Like they're always insane. When these two teams play each other, it ends up. I think it kind of didn't quite end up being the scoring fest last year than it did in some of the previous years. But sometimes this has happened. You've ended up with like 7-6 games and just absolute like nuts stuff. And I think that as much as like, we talked about Florida being like the significant better team, like it just seems to really open up in these kind of series where both teams are just scoring at will, and it just ends up being a fun matchup regardless of who you're playing. That said, I don't think that Tampa is the team that they have been previously when they've won and all that kind of stuff. We talked about if Kucherov wasn't on that Tampa team this year, whether they would even be in this wildcard spot. I can't see Tampa squeaking out this series. I have Florida in 6, but I can see them, going back and forward a little bit.
I think if Florida isolate Kucherov's over, well, that's the thing. If the entirety of any hope that Tampa has rests on the idea that Nikita Kucherov can get free and can probably work with Brayden Point, and it sounds weird to not include like Stamkos in that, but realistically, when they've been really good in these playoff runs, it's been Kucherov and it's been Point. And
I just think Florida's too deep. Like Florida just has too
Florida can roll lines, and Florida just rolls lines. And I have Florida winning this one as well. I just think that, but I think it'll be a heavy series, and I think Florida will be hoping to get out of it unscathed. And that's for me the hope for if you take Toronto in the Boston series, the hope for Toronto making the Eastern Conference Final is that Tampa and Florida beat the hell out of each other.
Yeah.
That's your hope, really. Let's go over to the West.
Yeah.
So we'll start with the Avs and the Jets. This is there's 2 really good series in the West. This is the first of them. Connor Hellebuck, I think, has largely driven what's happened in Winnipeg. And Nathan McKinnon has by far and away carried the Avalanche. And that, again, feels a bit like the battle for me. I've got the Avs because I've tipped the Avs to go all the way. I tipped them at the start of the season. I'm not backing down from that now. I think the Jets can make life difficult for them. I still have question marks over the consistency of Jets' performances. That's my question mark.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that the Jets are the more flawed team of the two of them, and obviously are going to be relying very heavily on that defense and goaltending. I've got Colorado as well coming out of this series. I feel like playoff McKinnon and some of the the horses that they have on that team are just going to be too much for Winnipeg. But I've got Colorado winning in 6.
Yeah, that leaves us into. Well, I'll use the real graphic for the Vancouver game. I shouldn't keep using the other one. They'll get angry with me. Vancouver, Nashville. Look, it sounds weird to say this. Both teams are playing a bit with found money, and that sounds weird to say for a team that won its division. But like Vancouver are a bit ahead of schedule, and largely because the Oilers forgot how to play hockey for the first half of the season. As we said, the Canucks were on an absolute PDO bender for the entirety of the season. They regressed a little bit back towards an average, but they still had the highest shooting percentage in the league. Thatcher Demko's back, which I think is a large thing for them. And I think, again, this is a matchup. I just don't see how the Predators score enough to win.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the series falls down for Nashville. I think Saros can do a really good job for them in net and keep them in it. But I don't see how the Preds are able to score enough goals to beat Vancouver.
Yeah, I really feel like it's a bit of a unstoppable force and movable object thing with both of these teams in terms of who can remain kind of doing the impractical thing that they've been doing all season. It's whether Vancouver can continue scoring at the insane pace that they have, and whether Nashville can continue to stop people scoring at the insane pace that they have been. I actually feel like this may be closer than it probably should be. I think that on paper, I like Vancouver to come out of this series, but I feel like there's going to be a couple of games where their lack of basically the real kind of lack of experience and lack of the kind of legitimacy of some of their results will maybe come back to bite them. I still have Vancouver winning this series, but I couldn't decide on this one in terms of games, and I ended up going Vancouver in 7.
I don't remember what I ended up going. It might have been 6. I think it was 6.
Yeah, I feel like I wanted to go 6. I wanted to go Vancouver in 6, but I don't know. I just have so many question marks about both of these teams that I just couldn't be confident in being bullish on Vancouver as much as I like some of their players.
It's not so much being bullish on Vancouver as I just fail to see where the goals are coming from for Nashville. That's my issue.
I think that's a big part of it. I mean, obviously, it's been a good season for Forsberg and for some of their kind of additions and stuff, but just the depth there on both teams in a big way, but also on Nashville is just not really there.
Now to a matchup that, of course, would look very much at home as the Western Conference Final. Dallas versus Vegas. Again, we talked about the idea of people making some business decisions in the last round in terms of where they were going to play. I struggle to think that Vegas willingly wanted Dallas.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have wanted Dallas if I was Vegas. I've actually got Dallas coming out of this series. I think that Dallas will actually be too strong for them. But this was one where I think if it's later on, I probably go Vegas. But for the first round, I think Dallas will probably get them in the first round.
Yeah, look, I think that Dallas is my class of the West for sure, and I think that I just don't know what Vegas is, given that they're just getting Mark Stone back in whatever condition that
he's
is.
Not going to be healthy. If you think he's coming back and playing at 100%,
he's obviously playing injured. How much he can perform up to his usual standard. How ready to play Hurdle is, what level of Eichel is that. I think there's just a lot of question marks around like this roster and a bunch of guys that haven't played a heap of time together this year. I think that if they'd gotten all of those guys back a month ago, I think I'd feel very differently about Vegas than I do now. I just don't know what this product is going to be when they get on the ice. And as you said, if they manage to limp through a first round series, I feel like they're probably better positioned in a second round series. Yeah. But I don't think that there's any team more difficult to get past in this first round than Dallas. So I picked Dallas in 6.
Yeah, I think Dallas are one of the few teams that can stand toe to toe with Vegas and outscore them. Just stand there and outscore them. And
I think that Dallas can play in really any way that you need them to. Like they can play defensive, they can run and gun, they can do whatever they need to do. I think that they've just got a lot of tools. Also,
this is kind of the last year of the DeBoer method where it works. So this is probably their last shot at it, because after this, DeBoer's methods fall off a cliff. But it is also the right time in the cycle for him to make the Stanley Cup final. That's what he does. So, wouldn't shock me at all. LA, Edmonton.
I have an inkling. I think I can guess which way you went with this.
Oh, you know exactly which way I went with this.
Yeah.
I've tipped LA. I know this is probably not going to work. I know this is really absolutely stupid. But I believe that the Los Angeles Kings are the ones who really hit upon the playoff structure of how to beat the Oilers. 2 series ago, that one where they very nearly eliminated them in 7 from an absolute nowhere position. You keep the top 2 players on the ice. You keep McDavid and you keep Draisaitl on the ice, and you box them and you rough them and you box them and you drain them. And you just don't give them an inch while they're there. And you take advantage of the 5 minutes they're off the ice, and you score on what is a suspect defense and goalie. And then you bring them back on the ice and you wear the 2 of them out. And that is
stylistically for sure. Like, I think that LA is the I think a couple of teams are the worst possible matchup for the Oilers.
Yeah, for me, as I said, I think LA and Vegas, which were the 2 options for the Oilers, are the 2 worst matchups the Oilers could possibly have seen in the first round, because they're both big enough to play them heavy. LA has some skill coming through. They're not quite a finished article, but they've got that skill coming through.
Yeah.
I just feel like I still don't think the Oilers are built well enough. I still think they're suspect. I still think it's very much on what Connor McDavid's going to do. And let's face it, if he really wants to, he can probably will them and can carry them the entirety of the way to a Stanley Cup. But I think LA is going to make him really work it and really work hard for it. And I just feel like LA's due one. And it wouldn't shock me in this Oilers season, which has been a weird season. It wouldn't surprise me if the Oilers get into this series and lose it.
I wouldn't be shocked at all. I agree with pretty much everything you've said there, and for that reason, I think there's a lot of question marks there, and it could very much go either way. I do think that McDavid and Draisaitl have the will to get past this LA team, though. But I think it's going to be real close. This is why I picked the Oilers in 7. But I wouldn't at all be shocked if the coin just flipped the other way and they just couldn't manage to score their way out of trouble.
And I think the thing that I think people forget or people miss out if I'm talking about the Oilers in particular, people I think miss out this idea that you don't like Connor McDavid, you don't like Leon Draisaitl. I'm like, no. I hate the way they've constructed around those 2. I think those 2 are amazing. I think that the problem is that if you have those 2, how do you not build a team that is just a behemoth? You should. There is no reason if you've got those 2 playing. And again, a large reason for it is they end up doubling them up on the same line. And I know that that's something that Knobloch's tried to avoid and tried to separate them out a bit more and give them some space and have 2 lines there that roll. I just feel like if LA can keep them tight early, you'll start seeing them running those 2 back to back to back to back to back. And if you start running McDavid and Draisaitl back to back to back, it makes LA's time easier on the other 3 lines. And that's where they can profit. But look, every part of my being tells me that the Oilers will probably win this one.
Yeah.
But I just think that if it's going to happen, LA's the matchup where I look at it and go,
yeah. I mean, it could just be a bounce one way or the other, realistically.
Yeah, realistically, it could be a case of, it could even be a case of like happened the other year where the Oilers played really well, but didn't get the job done because like they just ran out of steam.
Yeah.
They've had that happen where they've literally just run out of steam as they've gone. It happens. It's definitely it happens.
Did you want to talk about the second rounds and the rest of our predictions? Or
I'm going to bring my bracket up. So we'll finish off by looking at the brackets. So I'm just going to bring my bracket.
So I think we've got pretty similar, brackets. I think that the main thing that we differ on is Toronto and Boston in the East, and LA and Edmonton in the West. I think apart from that, we have more or less the same bracket. So looking at the kind of matches that we have, I think we've both got Dallas and Colorado in the West in the second.
This is my bracket.
Yeah.
So I've gone.
We're real close, honestly. Yeah. For the most part, I think apart from those 2 differences, we're pretty close.
So for everyone listening who's not watching, so in the East, I've got Florida and Toronto and New York and Carolina. And then I've got Florida versus Carolina in the conference final and Carolina making the final. And in the West, I've got Dallas and Colorado, and I've got Vancouver and LA, and I've got Vancouver and Colorado, and my final is Colorado versus Carolina.
So in the East, I have Florida and Boston, but I have Florida coming out of that series, and I have New York and Carolina, and I have Carolina coming out of that series. So we both end up with the same Eastern Conference final of Florida versus Carolina, and I also have Carolina coming out of that. So we both have we both have Carolina in the Cup final in the East. In the West, we differ a little bit though, because I have Dallas over Colorado. I have Dallas coming through to the conference final, and obviously we differ slightly in terms of like Vancouver and Edmonton, but I actually have Edmonton coming out of that series. I actually like the Vancouver matchup for Edmonton more than I like the LA matchup for Edmonton.
Yeah, I think if Edmonton get to Vancouver, I think if Edmonton get past LA, I think Edmonton made the conference final.
Yeah, so I have Edmonton and Dallas in the conference final, and I have Dallas going through to the Cup final. And I actually differ from my predictions at the start of the year. I had to look back at when we talked about this in October, and at the time I did have Dallas in the Cup final, but I actually also had Edmonton and Dallas. But my East was very different. At the time, I considered the Devils to be a real legitimate product.
You were very big on the Devils.
That did not happen. That really did not work out for me. But I've changed my mind in terms of the winner, because at the time I was predicting a Dallas Cup win. But I actually really like Carolina, especially with the Jake Gensel edition, and I can't go against my boy Jake Gensel, so I have Jake winning the Carolina Cup final over Dallas.
So the bracket challenge is open. There is the extra shift one. It's available on the NHL fans page. I've also put it on Twitter. So if you're following us on the extra shift, you can go to the Twitter and it's there. Come along. We'll go through it after every round. We'll see who ends up on top at the end of the Stanley Cup final. I'm really interested. I said I tipped Colorado at the start of the year, and nothing particularly has changed my mind on that. Although I think that Dallas-Colorado will end up being one of the best series I think we've ever seen if that happens. I think it'll be absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that if that pans out.
So, and that's going to do us for this week, I think. So thank you everyone for watching. Thank you everyone for watching. If you've watched a lot of me this morning, trust me, there was a lot of me to watch. But thank you for that. Thank you for everyone as well for supporting as always. If you like what we do, please reshare it. It really does help. Really does help us to get out there. Hopefully, I've got a couple of other things coming up in the next week or so. I'm trying to work on a few things. I might even do every couple of days cup update, just a brief one. I'll see how that goes. I'm intending to possibly do like a 15-minute cup update at the end of each cycle, but we'll see. Possibly also some more stuff on the Coyotes, so keep your ears and eyes open for that. But we will catch you all later.
Yeah.